Tonight on Bridge City News, things got a little heated last night as more than 300 people came out to share their thoughts with the province about the Lethbridge supervised consumption site. Alberta politicians speak out as the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion could face delays yet again. And we look at a rivalry which goes way back involving two Southern Alberta high school football teams.
Your nation, your province, your Southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening, thanks so much for joining us. Tempers flared last night as the province's supervised consumption site panel heard from both sides of the drug issue. BCN's Loris Alexander was there as many from our city gathered to express their concerns.
Because I feel like they're being used as pawns in a scheme to fill Arch's...
Hundreds fill the grand ballroom of the Coast Hotel where the Supervised Consumption Services Review Committee held its first of two meetings in Lethbridge Wednesday evening.
So why is he any different, is what I would like to know.
Advocates of the site saw it as a step in the right direction, but would still like more funding and support from the government.
I think one of the major problems with the supervised consumption site in Lethbridge in the way that it's being operated is it attracts outside clientele, and if the province wants to step up and make this a provincial solution, they should make it a provincial solution and not just concentrate the centers in major urban areas. Cooperation with surrounding First Nations, surrounding small towns, surrounding communities would probably yield a better result rather than having one big Roman Colosseum of illicit activity to spread out the services and have medical professionals rather than, selected individuals providing these services. I think would help the community.
I definitely stand in support of the SCS. The problems that we're seeing have been around for a very long time. They're economically motivated, racially motivated, and motivated in great part by mental health. And so these problems have always been there. And so creating support systems that can foster health and community and all of these good things are always a good thing. However, I also do believe that we need more support.
One 10-year-old girl spoke out about her fears concerning the heavy topic.
I do not feel good at all because I can't even leave my own backyard without having the danger of these things going on in our city. It is so dangerous, and my parents, it's like, you might think they're helicopter parents, but it's for my own safety.
The committee will hold a second meeting tonight between 5 and 9 p.m. at the Coast Lethbridge Hotel. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
A Lethbridge man who was charged with firing paintballs at clients and staff at the city's supervised consumption site will return to court tomorrow. 29-year-old Jesse James Bullman faces charges of 3 counts of assault with a weapon after the shooting at the end of August. Police say a female employee from Arches was injured when the man involved allegedly fired paintballs from a passing truck. Meanwhile, in Red Deer, RCMP say a man was shot and injured outside of the safe consumption site in that city. Authorities would not say if the victim was a client or a worker at the site. The man was taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. The mayors and reeves of Southern Alberta gathered in Taber recently to discuss the dire need of the HALO Air Ambulance program. The one-year contract between HALO and Alberta Health Services is set to expire on October 1st. At the Taber meeting, a motion was passed calling on Premier Jason Kenney and the Minister of Health, Tyler Shandro, to provide ongoing funding for HALO and to kick in with $750,000 in bridge financing to keep the helicopter in the air. The HALO chopper can reach the scene of accidents very quickly. From there, they can have quick access to heliports at hospitals across Southern Alberta. The Federal Court of Appeal has agreed to hear 6 challenges to Ottawa's earlier approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which may add to more delays to the twice-approved project. The court said the challenges relate to the adequacy of the government's consultations with Indigenous groups and that they must proceed on strict short deadlines. The decision marks the second time in the past year that Trans Mountain has run into legal obstacles. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers was not happy with the announcement. In a statement, the group said they were disappointed with the federal court's decision to grant leave for appeal. The Trans Mountain expansion project is critical to connecting sustainability-produced Canadian oil and natural gas to developing economies with high-growth markets. Many Alberta politicians were disappointed over the court ruling on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion being delayed once again.
Well, obviously, we don't want that project to be delayed. I think in terms of of the court ruling. It, really substantively doesn't change anything today. Obviously, we would have loved to have a result where they wouldn't allow any of the cases to be heard or considered, but it really doesn't change anything today. As you pointed out, we absolutely need additional market access, pipeline access for energy products to the coast and to other parts in North America. I've found the whole process of delays, as other Albertans have been frustrated, we've been very frustrated with that process. The fact that we can't get a pipeline to Tidewater in a reasonably predictable timeline is incredibly frustrating.
Recent data collected says less people are aware of our Canadian federal leaders than they were prior to the 2015 federal election. Surprisingly, a new study from Abacus Data says 7% of people do not know who Prime Minister Justin Trudeau really is, and 16% of people do not know much about federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer. Political science professor at the U of L, Jeffrey Hale, says that it's even more difficult for the NDP party to create awareness.
Being an opposition leader is one of the most thankless jobs in Canadian politics, and however hard you work, getting people's attention is not easy, and getting positive attention is not easy. It's one of the reasons people say that governments often defeat themselves rather than being defeated by the opposition, although you have to have a constructive alternative if people feel free to choose it.
Recent studies also show that back in 2015, 45% of Canadians had a very good idea of who former Prime Minister Stephen Harper was. Entering this election, PM Justin Trudeau has just 32% of people feeling the same way. SACPA was back for a new season today at the Royal Canadian Legion, featuring Speaker Travis Plaited Hair. He spoke about the Blackfoot Confederacy and its culture and what their future may hold.
I was honored to be asked to speak today. And what they wanted me to speak to today was basically talk a little bit about the culture, the Blackfoot culture, and more specifically the Gagné culture, which I'm a member of the Blood Tribe. City of Lethbridge is a part of the Blood Tribe, so to speak. So we have a lot of history in common here. So it's important that we talk about the culture, and when I say culture, I don't mean powwows, I don't mean fried bread and that. I'm talking real culture.
Plaited Hair is an educator in cultural awareness, a role model and mentor to Indigenous youth. The United Way of Lethbridge in southwestern Alberta kicked off its Local Love campaign yesterday, showcasing 20 programs in southern Alberta it would be supporting throughout the rest of the year.
We fund programs in 3 areas. So we focus on poverty reduction. We look at healthy families and strong communities, so looking at things like social isolation, mental health, just supporting people to feel like they belong. And we also support programs through child and youth development. So again, like school readiness, literacy programs, mentorship, just making sure that children have the supports they need to be successful.
We've been working with the United Way for a long time. It's always been something very dear to our company because every dollar that's raised here in Lethbridge stays in Lethbridge. We participate in what's called the Workplace Campaign, and how that works, at least at Lethbridge Ironworks, is the employees are able to donate dollars off their checks for a certain period of time up until Christmas, and at the end of that, the company matches the donations.
Some of the benefactors to this year's campaign include the Interfaith Food Bank, the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen, St. John Ambulance, the Parkinson Association of Alberta, and Big Brothers and Big Sisters. 2 schools in southern Alberta were listed on Football's Alberta's top 10 high school football rankings. The Raymond Comets are placed second in the province, while the LCI Rams came in 7th. Ainsley O'Reilly spent some time at LCI getting to know the coaches and players as they prepare for a big week of football south of the border.
Raymond and LCI football goes back generations, and it never really matters who you're better than in the province because the 2 teams are head-to-head division competitors.
We still have to, if we were ranked 1 or 10, we still have to beat Raymond in the zone game to advance the provincial playoffs. So to me, I don't get too hung up on them. I like to, I get a kick out of reading them, see what other teams did on a week-to-week basis. I'd be lying if I said I never read it. I think that's what I'm supposed to say, that I don't pay attention to the rankings. I'll take a look, but to tell you the truth, whether we are ranked ahead of Raymond or below Raymond, our goal is to come out and compete every game.
It means we got to put in some work. Definitely want to be number 1. Always have been, ever since I started. I always want to be the top dog no matter where I played. Definitely am willing to put in that work, and hopefully all my other teammates are too. Just got to keep working, keep grinding, keep doing what we do.
It's pretty electric, the rivalry. You know, I wouldn't say it's there's no hate there. It's not like a rivalry like that. I think both programs have a lot of respect for each other. LCI's coach right now, Darren Major, and I played against Darren in high school.
LCI is heading to Elko, Nevada this weekend for a game on Saturday versus Elko High. They're going to be without powerhouse linebacker Isaiah Banya this year after he's committed to Boise State. The team is going to make a pit stop to catch up with him on the way.
We actually get to go see him play at Boise State and then drive the extra 3.5 hours down to Elko. So that's kind of, once we saw that kind of fall into place, we felt like, oh, this is an opportunity. So we're excited to go see him on the blue turf. Hopefully he gets on the field, who knows? And then we get to get a football game out of it on Saturday.
That kind of gives you hope that you could do it too. And it just pushes you to want to work harder and do better. And it's going to be exciting to see him again. I haven't seen him in a while.
LCI will take on Raymond Friday, September 27th. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met with local business owners in Owen Sound, Ontario to discuss the need for improved rural broadband internet service. Trudeau also spoke about his party's plan for the economy and environment.
We need to do more investing in communities. We need to do more to make sure that Indigenous Canadians have a real shot at success. We need to do more to protect our environment and build an economy that is sustainable and resilient for future generations at the same time. And that is one of the things that the Conservatives just don't get. They still think there's a choice to be made between what's good for the economy and what's good for the environment. Well, I'm sorry, you can't have a plan for the future of our economy if you don't also have a real plan for protection of our environment for the future.
Fire officials in Halifax say they have been unable to identify the cause of the blaze that killed 7 children in their family home last February. The deaths included kids who ranged in age from 3 months to mid-teens.
At 12:43 a.m. on Tuesday, February 19th, our firefighters responded to a call they will never forget. More than 50 firefighters and support members from several fire stations and divisions responded or somehow were involved with the fire scene at 33 Quartz Drive. Dozens of our team members did everything in their power to fight the fire or figure out what caused it. Fire investigations, by their nature, are challenging to solve because often that evidence is destroyed by fire. In this case, we investigated every piece of evidence available and tested every possible theory to learn what we could about this fire. Despite our best efforts, we are unable to say what caused this tragic event.
More than 200,000 homes and businesses are without power as Hurricane Dorian slowly moves north along the U.S. East Coast. Most of the outages are in North Carolina, while the rest are in Georgia. Officials predict the storm, which is now a Category 3 hurricane, will knock out power to about 700,000 customers. The storm has also hit the Bahamas hard, leaving many people dead. The Prime Minister of the Bahamas says he's spoken with U.S. President Donald Trump, who pledged his support.
There have been 20 confirmed deaths on Abaco. We expect that this number will increase. I spoke with President Donald Trump, who has expressed the support of and pledged the assistance of the United States of America for the Bahamas in our time of need. I also want to thank the first responders from the international community, and especially those from the United States, for their exceptional assistance.
As Charleston, North Carolina begins to feel Hurricane Dorian's outer bands, residents in evacuation zones have begun arriving at Red Cross shelters.
Evacuations are stressful. People are leaving their homes. They don't know what they're going to go home to. We provide a safe haven for them.
They're expecting a lot of water downtown, and it was best to get out. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Well, basically homeless at the time. Once the rain hits and the wind comes, it's going to blow left, right, in and out. There's not very many places that you're going to find unless you're in a parking garage or in a building or in a house.
I'm just used to it. I'm ex-military, and this is nothing compared to combat.
A good Red Cross hug and a smile goes a long way in a shelter.
Allie Kurtz gave up a job in the movie industry to live her dream of working on the water. When she landed a job as a deckhand on a scuba diving boat, she was thrilled. Allie was one of the 34 who died earlier this week from a California boat fire. Her father, Robert Kurtz, says she passed away doing what she loved.
Let her fulfill her dream of being on the water. Scuba diving, working with people, loving sea life. She started to go back to school. She wanted to become a marine biologist. She was going to do that down here, and she came to visit us, and it was like watching somebody who just won the lottery.
The toxic divide over Brexit has cost British Prime Minister Boris Johnson another member of his government. His brother, Joe Johnson, is leaving as education minister and stepping down from Parliament. The younger Johnson says he is torn between family loyalty and the national interest. Boris Johnson, meanwhile, failed today to win sufficient support for his call for an early election.
I note that the leader of the opposition is once again not in his place in what I think is a slightly symbolic way. Mr. Speaker, 48 hours ago, he was leading the chants of "Stop the coup, let the people vote." Now he's saying, "Stop the election and stop the people from voting." I think there's only one solution. I think he has become the first, to my knowledge, the first leader of the opposition in the democratic history of our country to refuse the invitation to an election.
He is one colorful character. We had sun mixed with cloud and warm again today. The mild temperatures will be sticking around. Complete weather details are coming up. Another beautiful summer-like day in the Windy City today. Tonight, mainly clear with a low of 10. Tomorrow, increasing cloudiness with a high near 24. Overcast to 21 is expected on Saturday. Clouds mixed with sun and a high gain near 21 for Sunday. Monday, the rain clouds return with a high of only 17. Tuesday, mainly cloudy with the mercury dropping to 16. Wednesday, sunshine mixed with cloud and a high of 21. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 22 with an average low of 7. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1967 at 36 degrees, and the record low was -2 in 1956. Sunrise was at 6:52, sunset at 8:08. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Victoria and Vancouver will have a few clouds at 24, mainly cloudy and 23 degrees for Calgary. A mixture of sun and cloud and 23 as well for Edmonton. Just a few clouds at 24 for Regina. Mainly sunny and 22 degrees for Saskatoon. A slight chance of showers and 22 as well for Winnipeg on Friday. Cloudy and 22 degrees for Toronto. A good chance of rain and a high near 20 for Ottawa. Mainly cloudy and 21 degrees for Montreal tomorrow. Over the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be mainly sunny and 20. A mixture of sun and cloud and 21 degrees for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Lots of sunshine and 19 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mainly sunny day and a high near 18 degrees tomorrow. Canadian auto sales posted their first ever year-over-year increase in 17 months last month. A new report from DesRosiers Automotive Consultants says sales rose 0.6% in August. An 8.4% increase in light truck sales offset an 18.3% decline in passenger car sales. While August sales were positive, the overall market is still down 4.1% so far this year. The automotive consultant says Canada could see a second year of declines in new vehicle sales. The advocacy group that drafted a complaint against Google's YouTube service says a $170 million fine against the tech giant's violation of children's privacy is far too lenient.
So what Google was doing was it was collecting information, personal information from children who were watching YouTube videos, information about where they're located, their children's likes and interests, what videos they were watching, and using that information to target advertising to children. The Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act says you cannot do that unless you get parental permission first, and which Google was not doing. So the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act was passed in 1999, and it was was a bipartisan effort. It was recognized that new forms of advertising were popping up in the new internet economy, and that these methods that were being used to advertise, taking all of this personal information to personalized marketing, was unfair to children. And so what the law said was that if you were going to do that kind of advertising to children, you had to get parental permission first. The fine is not nearly adequate enough. It should have been in the billions of dollars. That's what would have sent a message to Google. That's what would have prevented future violations. It's interesting that Google didn't even report the fine that was coming to its stockholders, because it didn't even see it as affecting the company's bottom line or its stock prices. That's how small that it was.
Samsung says it's ready to start selling its highly anticipated folding phone. The original launch date was delayed because of problems with the screen. The South Korean tech giant says it spent several months refining the Galaxy Fold to improve its design and construction. The nearly $2,000 phone will launch in South Korea tomorrow, followed by the UK, France, Germany, and Singapore on September 18th. It'll also be coming to North America in the coming weeks. New research says letting your teenager have access to a credit card before they graduate from high school could be a useful tool in teaching them financial responsibility.
Well, there's some pros to having for teenagers learning how to use a credit card. For one, it allows them some safety and convenience. So the fact that if they're shopping online, it's always better to do so with a credit card than with a bank card, because there are some ramifications if your bank card information got out. It's also a great way for kids to start to build a good credit rating. For a lot of us, it can take years. So by getting a head start, it means that they'll have access to getting lower rates of interest in the future when they're purchasing their car or their home. So having a good credit card is important. It can teach kids responsibility, learning how to ensure that they're making good spending decisions, because parents will have an opportunity to provide some positive influence on this, some feedback in terms of how their kids are using, or in some cases, misusing a credit card. And for parents, perhaps allowing their kids to make a mistake with a couple $100 now at an early age, learning from it, as opposed to waiting until their adulthood and perhaps making mistakes where it's cost them thousands of dollars.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the mayors and reeves of Southern Alberta gathered in Taber to discuss the dire need of the HALO Air Ambulance program. The one-year contract between HALO and the AHS is set to expire on October 1st. At the Taber meeting, a motion was passed calling on Premier Jason Kenney and Minister of Health Tyler Shandro to provide ongoing funding for HALO and to kick in with $750,000 of bridge funding to keep the helicopter in the air. Homeopathic medicine has been around for hundreds of years. Apparently, it can be good for treating things like diabetes, arthritis, and even cancer. Homeopath Jean-Jacques Van Tonder joins me in studio next with more details. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Join your neighbors and take part in Lethbridge's Reuse Rendezvous, taking place Friday, September 6th to Sunday, September 8th. This gives residents the opportunity to give away or collect usable items for free. Place your items suitable to reuse in front of your residence Friday evening. Ensure that they're marked free. Then, throughout the weekend, people are invited to cruise the streets and help themselves to these free items. For more details, visit environmentlethbridge.ca/reuse. Are you going through divorce or separation? Find support and encouragement with Divorce Care, a support group that will be meeting weekly beginning Tuesday, September 10th at City Light Church from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Cost is $30 for the workbook. For more information, visit divorcecare.org. or call John and Sandy Dick at 403-892-7046. It's the 39th annual Lethbridge Terry Fox Community Run, taking place Sunday, September 15th at the Civic Center track, featuring special guest Fred Fox. Registration begins at 11 a.m. with the run at noon. No entry fee is required. Participants are welcome to walk, run, rollerblade, and cycle. For more information, email lethbridgeterryfoxrun@gmail.com or register online at terryfox.ca. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Homeopathy is one of the many natural health approaches to finding help with a variety of illnesses. Many believe it has improved their health. There are other people who say it's not really backed by science and it hasn't helped me that much. Joining me now in studio to discuss this is Jean-Jacques Van Tonder, who's a homeopath and president of Maison Naturelle International, located right here in Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News, Jean-Jacques.
Thank you, Al.
So homeopathy, can you explain to our viewers what it is exactly?
Okay, homeopathy is the medicine that is used by natural practitioners, and it goes by the principle of like cures like, and that stems from even Hippocrates himself. He had the idea of like could cure like, but didn't come to light until the 1700s with a doctor called Samuel Hahnemann from Germany.
Okay.
He discovered that a substance used could actually cure the problems that that substance would cause in a dilution. So
Diluted state, right?
Absolutely. He came upon this when he was translating a document from Dr. William Cullen, stating that cinchona, or the Peruvian bark, would be used thanks to its astringent qualities to heal malaria.
Oh.
And him being fascinated in chemistry, he knew that there were other astringents that were better than that, and it didn't make sense for him. So, being a person that wants to know more, he decided to take small bits of quinine and ingest them, and he wrote down all the symptoms that he'd experienced, and it mirrored the exact symptoms of malaria.
So Jean-Jacques, what are some of the substances in homeopathic medicines? What are they made out of?
Well, they're made of three different areas: the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, and the animal kingdom. So when we're taking, for example, arnica. Arnica is a little beautiful flower that grows in the mountains. When you dilute arnica in an extract, then you can use it to treat bruising, shock, lack of good circulation, and so on.
Wow.
If we're taking the animal kingdom, a person that's allergic to bees, for example, apis is the Latin word for bees. When we take apis in a 5CH dilution, which is a dilution that is 100 to the 5th power, so you can imagine that's quite dilute.
Sure.
But when you ingest that, swelling goes down within 5 minutes.
Wow.
Because it gives the body the information of what is causing the problem. Like cures like.
Now, one of the arguments against homeopathic medicine is the fact that it's diluted to such a high degree, you're essentially left with no molecules from the original source. How would you respond to that?
Well, that is interesting, because when you take a molecule, it's going to have an effect on your body. But because it goes through the digestive system. But what happens to that molecule when there's only information from it left, but not actually the molecule left? You actually are able to have a higher quality of efficiency. So to bypass the digestive tract, for example, a person with hyperactivity disorder. When you take coffee, if you take too much coffee, it's going to cause a hyperactivity in you.
Yeah.
But if you dilute coffee to a certain dilution, you're actually going to give the body the frequency or the information from that, and is going to reverse the process. So it's very fascinating how it works.
What do you say to some people, though, Jean-Jacques, that say homeopathic medicines have worked very well for them, but other people say, no, it's more like a placebo effect? That's really what you're experiencing here.
Well, that could be for some people. But in most cases, it's because there's information being given to their cells and the memory of their cells to be able to help their body heal itself for itself. That's why we don't mainly treat a symptom, we treat a person. and each person is different. And so we would do different treatments for different people. What goes for one doesn't necessarily go for the other in the same symptom, because their body functions differently. And so we have to adapt.
How about scientific evidence actually supporting homeopathy?
Well, there's quite a bit, actually. There's been lots of research. I was trained in the homeopathic lab in Paris, in France, under Dr. Albert Claude Kemoun. And he's one of the world's biggest researchers in homeopathy. Actually, in 2000, he was called to go to India to help teach 1,000 people how to detoxify the population from arsenic poisoning. Wow. Because they discovered that many people were getting so ill and they were dying from arsenic poisoning. Wow. And the reason for that is that 20 years prior to that, they capped all the wells, and so there was no more vegetation which would draw the arsenic out of the water. So they were becoming intoxicated.
I understand that public health insurance in countries in Europe, including Switzerland, now includes coverage for homeopathy. Are you aware of any other countries that are doing this right now?
To my knowledge, France does to a certain percentage of the prescription. So if a homeopathic medical doctor decides to say, well, you need arnica or you need any other substance which is homeopathic, a portion of that would be covered.
Do we see a lot of homeopathic medicine throughout Europe today?
Yes, there is a lot. There is a lot, including England. The Queen Mother uses homeopathy and has for years and years.
Oh, what kind of ailments is it being treated for?
Well, she used homeopathy in her daily living.
Oh, okay.
And that's why she's so healthy. And so she's been treating herself with natural medicine for many, many years.
But we see a lot more of the homeopathic medicines as well in countries in Asia, including India.
India is huge. India uses homeopathy and has for many, many years. The advantage of homeopathy is you take a substance, you dilute that substance, and one dilution is going to do one thing, another dilution is going to do something else in an infirmity. But because you're diluting, so it becomes very not too expensive to be able to have that medicine available. And India, people aren't very, very wealthy, and so it becomes accessible to most people. And so it's beautiful to be able to use that.
So Jean-Jacques, what illnesses in particular have you seen homeopathic medicine really help people with?
Digestive disorders, hormonal imbalance, arthritis, rheumatisms, even in pregnancy. I'm fortunate to be able to help some people in Panama, and there are two couples that just could not get pregnant. And thanks to the treatments that I'd given them, both of them became pregnant.
That's amazing. I have a bit of a sensitivity when it comes to mint.
Yeah.
You know, I can't use mint toothpaste. I go to the dentist, you know, they clean my teeth, then use the mint dental floss. I'm like, I'll be inflamed, right? Now, I'm also told that patients should not consume anything containing mint. What is it about mint that really inhibits the medicine, homeopathic medicine?
Okay, well, mint will cancel homeopathics.
Oh.
And the reason for that is because when you ingest mint, what happens is it surrounds all the cells. I mean, you can feel it when you have a mint toothpaste or a mint candy.
It's strong.
It's strong.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not that it cancels it as such, but it surrounds the cells, which prevents the information going back and forth, so it annuls everything. And that's how it works.
Now, does a homeopath have any kind of testing beforehand to determine what really to prescribe patients?
In a way, yes, because we go through a slew of questions. Even questions like, for example, do you prefer being in the mountains or at seaside? Now, that has nothing to do with an ailment.
Both.
But for us...
I love both.
Well, that's the thing, and so it's hard
Right.
to choose. But some people that prefer more the sea, certain remedies are going to work better for them than those that prefer the mountains. And so we ask a bunch of questions.
Let's say if I had fibromyalgia, right? A lot of people in my family suffer from that.
Yeah.
And I love being close to the ocean, by the sea. What would you recommend for me then?
Well, I would say, first of all, we'd work on detoxifying cells and tissue. Because in most cases with fibromyalgia, there's an intoxication that's happened over many, many years, and then those toxins move from side to side, which means that the pain goes around.
Right.
And then there's a lack of energy, and it continues that way. So what we do is we'd work on first detoxifying the liver, the kidneys, the skin, the intestines, help the body to regain its proper function. And as the elimination happens, so improvement starts happening. And so we'll use certain formulas, substances, homeopathic, to be able to help the body not only regain health and energy, but to evacuate those toxins which are actually causing the root problem, right?
Do you work with victims of car accidents or maybe athletes who've been injured?
I do quite a bit. Arnica is the biggest one for those people. Arnica is the first aid remedy in homeopathy. Now, there are a few cautions. Arnica, if a person's had a car accident, you cannot give arnica less than 7 CH dilution. 7 CH dilution is a safe dilution and higher.
Okay.
If it's less, like say for example it's 4 CH, if there's internal bleeding, it could increase that bleeding.
Oh, wow.
And so that's where you want to be careful. And there's just a few cautions in homeopathy, but very few. Arnica is one of them. So 7 CH and higher is safe. Sulfur is another one. If you take sulfur homeopathically, if you haven't eliminated toxins and opened the eliminatory systems, then you can create an explosion of elimination. So I don't know if you've seen people with rashes on their skin and boils. Well, that's what happens when you give sulfur in a higher dilution. 5 CH doesn't work like that, but 15, 30 CH, it'll push stuff out. That's why sulfur is called the king of homeopathy.
Is there a danger, though, Jean-Jacques, between combining traditional medicine with homeopathic medicine?
There is not, actually. In France, they use it all the time. They give a prescription and they say, okay, but for these things, you need to take homeopathy. But the only importance to know is that it needs to be taken 2 hours separate from prescriptions, because else homeopathics won't work. The prescription is going to be too strong. Because we're dealing with dilutions, you're going to have no effects. And so they're totally compatible if you use it the right way.
How about people who suffer from arthritis? How can you help them out?
Arthritis is a build-up of acids. So there's 3 different kind of acids: oxalic acid, phosphatic acid, and uric acid, which is the main one, the cause of arthritis.
Right.
And that's a build-up on the bones and joints. Once you start eliminating that using the evacuation, thanks to homeopathy, arthritis diminishes and agility and flexibility in joints starts happening again.
How can we use homeopathic medicine to help treat patients who suffer from diabetes or even cancer?
Those are a little tough. However, there's been great success with homeopathy with that. Now, it depends what stage of cancer. If you're talking about cancer, cancer is a tough one.
Like maybe early on,
if
stage
it's
1
early,
or 2?
If it's early on cancer, we
Right.
can, and again, cancer, what is it? It's an accumulation of bad cells which multiply. So if toxins have accumulated to such a degree, the best way is to eliminate those toxins. And if the tumors have proliferated, you need to use, for example, the homeopathic substances, including iodine, to burn up those tumors and evacuate the toxins. Now, we like I said, we treat the individual, not specifically the problem. Once you start rectifying systems in an individual, it starts building up strength and eliminating the bad in the system.
How about helping somebody with migraines?
That as well. Migraines is a tough one in a sense that 10 migraines are different for different people. It could be structural. It could be something out in C1, C2, C3.
Environmental, maybe?
It could be environmental allergy. Allergies are, the root cause of allergies are intestinal intoxication.
Okay.
And so migraines could be hormonal too. Once we rectify those and balance the systems and organs, then migraines tend to dissipate. So migraines are a hard one to treat, but very efficient in homeopathy.
How about adverse side effects from taking homeopathic medicine?
So
Are there any?
There aren't adverse side effects. So if we understand side effects, so for example, if I take a prescription drug and I get all these symptoms, that's a side effect.
Right.
In homeopathy, it doesn't really work that way. The worst you could get is maybe a skin rash, maybe a little bit of diarrhea, if that was the case, but it either works or it doesn't. You could have a healing crisis, which means the body's healing faster than what you'd expect, and so maybe you'd have that rash, which I was talking about. but there's no adverse side effects in homeopathy. We actually use it for pregnant women, we use it for animals, we use it for infants. It's totally safe, and it's the beauty of it because it helps and works. Now
it's au naturel.
It's a natural, that's right. If the healing doesn't take place like, you know what, I have this symptom, I take this, and the symptom's going to be gone. It doesn't work that way because you got there and it took time to get there. So it's a gradual, and maybe in the space of a few days, a few weeks, depending on the symptom, it dissipates and goes away.
So any final thoughts or advice you want to share with our viewers on homeopathic treatment? Maybe somebody's a little nervous about getting started?
Well, I would say, you'll never know until you try. It's safe. There's no side effects as such. The worst that can happen is that it doesn't work.
You don't need a prescription?
You don't need a prescription. You can go to a health food store, you can pick up some homeopathics, or you can come to see a professional like myself, and we can help you in a way that you can actually get the treatment that fits yourself so that you can heal. Cure everything, I'm not going to say that does that because it's not true. You need just like it takes a community to raise an infant or a child, it takes many different disciplines to heal a person. And so homeopathy is one of those disciplines which will help a person get better in a gentle, natural way.
Jean-Jacques Von Tonder, a homeopath and president of Maison Naturelle International right here in Lethbridge. Thanks for joining me today on Bridge City News.
Thank you very much.
There are many people who get upset that there are people in the world who are enormously wealthy, especially when we see so many people who are living in poverty. And that leads to the question, is wealth immoral? Joining us to discuss this is Dr. Calvin Beisner. He is the national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance and also the author of the article, A Sad Tale of a Wealthy Millennial's Moral Confusion. And I really encourage viewers to read this. CornwallAlliance.org is where you can connect with this article. Cal, welcome to Bridge City News once again.
Well, thanks very much. It's great to be back with you.
Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I mean, I think we all wrestle with how to steward the relative wealth we enjoy here in the Western world, and we can feel guilty when we see how much we have compared to those in less developed nations. I mean, Cal, your story starts with a young woman who is telling her mother how guilty she felt for being able to go out for dinner, and her mom, living in Africa, was struggling to make ends meet, right?
Yeah, that's the case. And this young lady, after having gone out with friends to dinner in Chicago, she had immigrated from South Africa to the United States, and she called her mother on the phone at some point. Her mother's still in South Africa, and she told her mother how guilty she felt. And to her surprise, her mother responded with a rather stinging rebuke. She said, "How dare you spit in God's face?" Her mother was urging her, don't feel guilty for the wealth that you enjoy there. Instead, count it as a blessing from God, and then use it to benefit others, including, of course, she ought to use it to benefit her mother. She should care for her mother. But there's nothing wrong with having wealth, and when one has it, one should treat it as a blessing from God, but something that is entrusted to one to serve others as well.
Now, you kind of wrote this article in response to another article by a man named Adam Roberts. He's a millennial who wrote his article for Vox, and it was entitled, Is Wealth Immoral? I understand he felt guilty for having inherited over $1 million, wealthy parents. Can you share some of his story?
Well, he explains that his parents and his grandparents built their wealth through investments in the oil industry and in banking and in some companies that produced equipment for the military. And he felt like there was something wrong with all three of those, something immoral about all of those. But he also just simply felt like there was something wrong with any economic system, any society in which individuals could amass great amounts of wealth. And so he felt like there ought to be something done to just make it impossible for any individual to accumulate millions or billions of dollars. He'd inherited about 1.2 million. And he said that as he compared himself with many others around him who really were in need, he felt like it was very important for him to give away much of what he had. He had by this time given away about a third of what he had inherited, and he intended to give away the rest. Now, I actually admire his compassion, I admire his care for the poor, and I admire his decision to give away what he had. But that decision should have been based really not on a sense of guilt about what he had, but instead on a decision to help those who were in need. And he ought to recognize that he's in a position to help them precisely because he did have that wealth. If he didn't have it, he couldn't have helped them.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to give something away that you don't have, for sure. Now, he felt that a system that allows people to amass, that kind of wealth while others struggle is immoral. That's interesting. He's somehow thinking that's wrong. But as you point out, then how do people actually get enough money to share with other people?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most basic rules about how to help the poor is don't be one of them. If you are poor yourself, you can't do much to help the other poor. Doesn't mean you can't do anything, but you can do much more if you're not. And as he tries to say, look, we need a system that would just make it impossible for individuals to amass great amounts of wealth. Well, what kind of a system does that? It can only be a system that can take away what people earn for themselves. That's a position that violates private property rights, that refuses to reward people for their hard work, for their careful preparation for careers. And when you refuse to reward people for their efforts, well, those efforts pretty quickly disappear. If he thinks that it's a good thing for people to produce some wealth by being medical doctors, but not by being in the oil industry, not only is that a short-sighted judgment in terms of the oil industry, because tremendous benefits have come from it, but also he fails to recognize that if you're not going to reward people handsomely for making all the sacrifices necessary, financial sacrifices, years and years of very, very diligent study, self-denial. If you won't reward people for that, you won't get many people doing it. And that means that we will go without good doctors.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think people, again, as you point out, really mean well. They want to help, but they haven't thought it through logically how this will work, to redistributing wealth just, randomly here or piece by piece. Many people feel that it's immoral to have what they call excessive, wealth. But again, ponder that for a moment. How do we define excessive? Now, King Solomon was perhaps the wealthiest man on earth ever, but interestingly, that wasn't his downfall, I don't think. He's not criticized for that, biblically speaking, I don't think.
Right. Indeed, many of the most important characters in biblical history were wealthy people. Job, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, David, Solomon, Joseph of Arimathea in the New Testament, who provided his grave for Jesus, was described as a wealthy man. Wealthy women provided food and shelter for Jesus and the disciples as they went about in their itinerant ministry. Lydia in the early church was a seller of purple, we're told in the book of Acts. Well, purple was a thing that was used only by the very wealthy. Lydia was herself probably a very wealthy woman. The Apostle Paul benefited from her provision. Wealth is not a problem. When we idolize it, when we begin to treat it as if it's our God, when we act as if our ownership of it were absolute, instead of a stewardship under God in which he entrusts wealth to us to serve other people, that's when we abuse wealth. But it's not the wealth itself that's wrong. It's our own hearts.
I think the definition of excessive wealth, if we're honest, we probably look at ourselves in the mirror, is anybody who has more money than me. That's excessive. There's something wrong with that, right? We need to rethink that. So, you pointed out earlier, this individual, Adam Roberts, writing the article, he's wrestling with this wealth here and how it was actually accumulated. Does it matter how you gain it? Now, again, he had mentioned, some oil, maybe some military spending and so forth, as compared to maybe getting rich, being a doctor, which is maybe more benevolent and that sort of thing. But Is that really an issue?
So you might think, anyway. And yet, think about this. Doctors use hundreds of different medications and hundreds of different pieces of equipment that are derived from oil. Oil that's brought out of the ground in order to produce fuel for our cars, our trucks, our buses, our ships, our airplanes, and so on, which itself does wonderful things, transporting goods and people and services and people all over the world. That's all good. But also there are thousands of byproducts from oil. Doctors wouldn't be able to get much done if it weren't for the fact that we make those byproducts from oil, and we wouldn't be bringing up the oil, drilling it, if those were the only thing that we could do with it, because in fact, those don't bring enough profit to oil companies to make it worth their going to the trillions of dollars worth of investment necessary to get that oil. So if we want the privileges, if we want the blessings, the benefits of medicine, we need to want oil. And similarly for coal and natural gas, other fossil fuels, these are the most abundant, affordable, reliable sources of energy available to us, with the possible exception of nuclear. But unfortunately, a lot of environmentalists hate nuclear, even though it's got a better safety record than anything else. And frankly, abundant, affordable, reliable energy is indispensable to lifting and keeping whole societies out of poverty. So if Adam Roberts really cares about the poor, he should want them to be able to benefit from fossil fuels, because those are what have lifted billions out of poverty and can lift billions more.
Interesting perspective, yeah. Now, I think what we're seeing coming out of this kind of mindset, and we're seeing more and more of this worldview spreading, but organizations and political parties, they're enacting policies that are precisely aimed at preventing individuals from becoming super wealthy and powerful. Some see that as a good thing, but is it necessarily?
Boy, if you look at the history of socialism, and I don't mean, a welfare state. Welfare state is not the same thing as socialism. Socialism is insisting that the state must either own or at least control the major means of production in your economy. Basically, it's a denial of private property when it comes to productive property. If you look at the history of socialism, what you see is a history of poverty and a history of extreme oppression. The reason for the one, poverty, is that socialism really doesn't reward people for their unusually great efforts. And if you're not going to be rewarded, a lot of people just won't make those extra efforts. But the reason for the oppression is that, frankly, most people are not real happy about having their property taken away from them and given to somebody else. And they will resist if they're able. And so I try to help people to recognize that socialism is the violent means of exchange, and the free market, or capitalism, is the peaceful means of exchange. If I want something that you have, the only way I can get it from you in a free market is to offer you something that you want more than what you already have. And the only way you can get me to give you that is to offer me something that I want more than what I already have. So the exchange will take place only voluntarily in a peaceful relationship between the two of us. But in socialism, if I want something you have and you're not willing to give it to me, well, I can vote for somebody who will go to Parliament or Congress and pass a law that requires you to give that to me. And then if you resist, you're now a lawbreaker. And what happens to lawbreakers? They get arrested, they get tried, they get convicted, they get put in prison, or if they resist, they can be shot. This is the record of socialism, with well over 100 million people killed by their own governments in socialist or communist countries.
We don't want to see that starting up again, for sure. And if somebody really believes in wealth distribution to make the world a more just, equitable place, I mean, if their own lives should start to reflect that. Any thoughts on what that would actually look like then?
Well, certainly they ought to be giving generously, and that's what we as Christians are called to do. The early church is described in the book of Acts as a church in which nobody thought of his possessions as belonging only to him. People thought of their possessions as given to them by God to use for the service of their brothers and sisters in Christ, the needy in their communities. And for that reason, they were selling property and giving the proceeds to help the poor around them, so that Luke could tell us in Acts chapter 2 and chapter 4 that there were no needy among them, because the needs were being met by this generous, charitable giving. But it wasn't a matter of justice. It was a matter of charity, and it reflected the giving of God to us, of Christ himself. Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 8 that he, Christ, who was rich, became poor for our sakes, that we through him might become rich. This is the gospel. And unfortunately, what happens with the social justice movement is that justice gets confused with grace. God ordained the church to dispense grace. He ordained the state to dispense justice. And justice means rendering to people what they are due, what they deserve, what they've earned. Whereas grace means rendering great benefits where in fact we are due the exact opposite. So the gospel tells us that we're justified by grace through faith in Christ, not by earning our justification. And when you confuse justice and grace, you ultimately you corrupt the gospel and you lose it.
I appreciate you sharing that perspective. We need to hear that. And you point out that this victim mindset, I think it's something like that, a victim mindset. It encourages envy, resentment toward those who God has blessed, and also some false guilt on the part of those who are blessed, right? So brief final thoughts on how we should view wealth?
Well, what we should do is to recognize that it is a gift from God, and it is something for which it's perfectly okay for us to work for it. We mustn't make it our own God. We mustn't idolize it, right? We have to subdue that temptation. But there's nothing immoral about having wealth, and we need to use it well. The whole issue of social justice, the resentment of the rich, the idea that we have to have state-enforced redistribution of wealth, I've addressed that in a booklet called Social Justice versus Biblical Justice, How Good Intentions Undermine Justice and Gospel. And actually, if any of your viewers go to cornwallalliance.org and click on the donate button and make a donation of any size, no matter how small, and ask for social justice, we'll be glad to send it to them. And if they're in the U.S. anyway, their gift will be 100% tax deductible.
Right. Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Cal, for sharing your perspective with us here today.
Well, thank you very much, too, and God bless.
Dr. Calvin Beisner, he is the national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance and author of the article, A Sad Tale of a Wealthy Millennial's Moral Confusion. It's really worth the read. You can do that online at cornwallalliance.org. On behalf of all of us at Bridge City News, thank you so much for watching today.